much for your service over the last year, sir. County Executive Glassman, welcome to MCA.
Thank you. Thank you for that nice introduction. And it's good to be with you. And I appreciate all the hard work your members have done throughout this past 13 months also. It's not only been a trying time for local governments and state governments, but particularly small businesses, folks in the business community, as they've had to adapt to a pandemic that we have not seen, many of us in our lifetimes. In Harford County, we've grown, as you said, to about 250,000 citizens. I just rolled out, and I don't know if this is good or bad, our first $1 billion budget yesterday to the county council, half of which funds education and the other half all our public safety, governmental agencies, fire departments, and so forth. Over the past year, one of my main goals throughout the pandemic, in addition to COVID and really providing the kind of medical resources our first responders, our hospital, and all our allied agencies needed, was to try to find some kind of balance to keep the local economy moving forward here in the county, and working with our state partners who, the governor at points has provided executive orders that close certain segments of the economy, and particularly numbers regarding capacity and so forth. In Harford County, we kind of really never went beyond what the state required us to do. We wanted to try to keep folks working and keep our local economy moving. In fact, in Harford County, we never missed a single day in local government. And one of the investments I made 6 years ago, and I like to kind of remind people, is it's expensive, but we launched several digital platforms in Harford County, ranging from budgeting, transparency, procurement, but also in the field of inspections and permitting, which many of your members do. We now can permit a single family home or a subdivision or a construction site all online. You can actually do your application, your plans, permitting, and at the end of the day, after you've paid unfortunately, you have to pay your permitting fees and your inspection fees. But we can print out a UNO, and you can print it out at home if you'd like, and never have to leave your office as far as design and construction of projects. We even used our iPad system to do inspections and keep all of our projects open. Everything from the Havre de Grace Senior High School, which maybe missed 1 or 2 days at the peak of the pandemic, and that was due to some COVID outbreaks, to our smaller commercial and residential projects with the Board of Education and the various projects that we had moving in the county. So that turned out to be a good thing. We've also been able to distribute the federal and state aid. We distributed about $40 million through our county departments. And I hate to say, and many of your members probably know this, but we can get a check through our grant and aid programs within 3 to 4 weeks and build a program up through our digital platforms. And that's probably before you've got an acknowledgement letter from the state or federal government. So I'm a firm believer that local government is best able to turn on a dime and really work with local businesses, state businesses to get that kind of aid out. And so as we come around to a year through this process, I can tell you that the balance that we did has worked out for us when I put together this year's budget. In fact, even with the pandemic, our income tax, property tax base grew about 3%, which is pretty good in the midst of a pandemic. And in fact, this year when we presented the budget, we fully fund education, funded our public safety, our fire departments, and still were able to keep my $23 million reserve balance, which has helped us maintain our AAA bond rating for the last 6 years. And in fact, this year we got the lowest borrowing rates that we've ever had in the history of the county. And all at the same time, and a lot of your members will know this from Harford County, is that we're one of the only Big 8 counties that has not raised taxes, income, or property for the last 6 years. And in fact, this year we're adopting the constant yield, which will adopt the rate from about $1.40 to $1.22. And so we've got a good story to tell in Harford County, and it's a fairly simple thing that I learned before I retired from Baltimore Gas and Electric Company, when we were always kind of looking for efficiency and savings. But I remind folks that every time you get a new smartphone, it is smaller, it is faster, and usually it provides better service. And I still think there's a lot of areas in local government and state government where, in fact, we could adopt those principles and become more efficient, smaller, and save money at the same time. And so that's what I've pushed for the last 6.5 years to make the county kind of more nimble and still produce savings every year. And so we're really able to do that through efficiency and economic growth. I think a lot of folks really put that to the side, but we just had Wayfair signed here in Harford County, and we have a couple of larger warehouse e-commerce buildings coming online. They're not the answer to everything, and I know in 20 years they may be robotic, but right now, I-95, where Maryland is in Harford County, we are close to the epicenter to reach most of the mid-Atlantic and northeastern population. So it is a tool in our toolbox. And of course, we continue to work with Aberdeen Proving Ground, our largest employer, which is also growing. No longer has the troop base that it may have had 20 years ago. In fact, now it has more PhDs than any military base in the country. And the missions there have grown more towards biochemical, nuclear research, warfare safety development for our fighters and men and women in the military. So we've got a lot going on here. Harford County is strong, and I think a lot of the efforts that we've done over the last 6 years have really positioned us to be one of the stronger Big 8, if not one of the strongest counties in Maryland. We're like a middle child. We're like number 7 or 8 in the Big 8, but in fact, and we don't always get the attention. But I like to think if you really dig down and look at our economic base, our education, our quality of life, that in fact Harford County is really one of the premier counties in the state of Maryland. And I think a lot of the things that we've learned with budgeting and taxation and economic growth, we can certainly use in the state to really grow ourselves out of what I think, and you've all read about some of the federal programs, which has helped us. We're going to use some of those American Rescue Funds from the recent bill, really on one-time expenditures since they're not reoccurring, but I built in really to expedite broadband expansion in the county. We, like other counties, have some areas that have infrastructure deficiencies as far as getting broadband to professionals and school children. We're going to speed that up. Also, since 2009, when the state took away our highway user revenue that we build roads with, we're going to use some of those funds for the first time to start converting some of our tar and chip roads to asphalt, about 34 miles, and some other safety improvements that we've had to defer because of that. Of interest to your members, I'm sure we've got about 14 to 15 capital projects, not only in the county government, but Board of Education, particularly in this time, to upgrade HVAC heating plants in many of our buildings, which really need that, particularly in light of COVID and whatever may come down the line. We've got that budgeted also, in addition to a renovation of Jappatown High School. And Bel Air still seems to be is a very popular area in the county. In fact, we have so much growth that the Homestead Wakefield will be building a new elementary with some more capacity in that Bel Air area, so we can continue to grow and grow smart to make sure we provide capacity and roads and services to match it. And so those are a lot of the good things going on in Harford County. And listen, I'd be glad to answer any questions and talk about a lot of the great things we're doing here. I could go on forever talking about
No, I think you hit on some very important points for our members, county executive, and we really appreciate that. Yeah, I think you're right. A lot of people don't always think that I like how you kind of framed it as one of the top 8, like the middle kid. You just went through a budget process. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can.
Okay, terrific. So, it's a $1 billion budget now. And I think you indicated about 50% is earmarked for education, if we heard you correctly. What does the remainder of the budget look like, more or less?
Well, so public safety, of course, for the last 6 years, we've spent a good bit of time building back. Unlike the state in this newer movement to kind of defund the police or to shrink public safety, we've invested in our law enforcement folks to build back their salaries for recruitment and retention, and also to train and make them kind of a top flight law enforcement agency here in Harford County. And so public safety is a large portion of that. Also on our first responder side, Harford County has a volunteer fire system, but our EMS system is handled mainly by a foundation and a county paramedic system. And so there's a large piece of funding there for that area of the budget. General county budget only grows at about 3%. I always tell folks that when you look at education, we fund 50 cents on a tax dollar to education. The other 50 cents, we run all of general government, water, sewer, planning and zoning, permitting, DPW, push the snow, all the array of services, libraries, public safety, with that other 50 cents. So it puts it in perspective of what we're doing. One of the larger mandates that's coming from the state, and we're going to we're kind of going to do it about a year early to find some potential savings, is the body worn camera mandate that's coming down from the state to every county to outfit your officers with body cameras. Now, I think that's pretty good. I mean, it's good for citizens and the community. It also helps protect law enforcement officers that have a video a recording of their interaction. But I always say these type of mandates come with a price tag. Just for Harford County, about 300 cameras. The time that we buy the equipment, the state's attorney will need 3 additional positions. The sheriff needs 3 additional positions. You begin to look at $1.5 to $2 million each year in additional expenses to local governments. We're in a position to handle that, but think of the small municipalities in your county, particularly in our county, Bel Air, Aberdeen, that are going to have to deal with budgeting and finding out a way to make that happen. And I guess being a former president of the Maryland Association of Counties, when I look at new policy initiatives, I always look at what the local impact is. There's usually a price tag, and sometimes the state or federal government will fund it initially, but historically, within a couple of years, that goes away. Even the election reform bills, to provide additional polling locations, absentee ballot mail system. All of that sounds really good. For Harford County, next year, that'll be about $1 million more to open additional site, provide poll books, and additional labor costs. And so I'm one of those guys that always read the fiscal note. I see a good friend of mine, Ellen Valentino, on there that I've known forever, since I won't date her, since my days in the legislature. But I think my experience in the legislature and as a county official kind of give me a unique perspective on what those kind of things cost in the long run. And Maryland counties, not only in these smaller policy areas, but as you saw, the Kerwin Education Reform Bill passed, and Kerwin 2.0. Those bills all look like they have some initial funding for local counties, but I can tell you, serving on that workforce, on that task force, that 5 or 6 years down the line, when you add in additional capital costs for pre-K classrooms, hiring a third more teachers and having them teach a third less, that equation will bring a huge burden to local governments and really put a lot of tax pressure on locals to find a way to fund that. So sometimes you have to look down the road a few years, because the bills look good for the first couple of years, but I've been there during recessions when they have to cut, and counties are usually the first thing to take the biggest hit. I mentioned earlier highway user revenue, when they took a portion of, or mostly all of our gas tax revenue, has never been restored. We've got about 25% back, but most counties are dealing with about 75% less of their share of the gas tax, of what your motorists pay. And so that's why in a lot of suburban rural counties, you see road deterioration and not being able to keep up with their safety projects. So that's a long answer.
It's an excellent answer, though.
Yeah.
I have one more question, and then we'll kind of open it up to the group. Is there a is there a concern that's maybe under the radar, that's maybe not public, that you have concerns about? Is there something out there, you talk about debt and whatever it might be? Is there something out there that maybe the public doesn't think about at the county level that you worry about, that you might want to talk about?
Yeah, and I know we're all kind of COVID out. We all have COVID brain, I think, from the last year. But I think even with the vaccinations and with the variants working out there, I think to some degree there's going to be a new normal for the next couple of years, dealing with some degree of a positivity rate and this in front of us. So I think that's always going to add some pressure to where we may be in our economic recovery. And I think it's something we're going to have to kind of deal with and get used to. After several $1 trillion and the perspectives of another maybe $1 trillion, I do think no one's thinking about it, but to some degree, I think we're going to have a spending hangover in the next couple of years, because there is a limit on the amount the federal government can borrow and keep pumping out into the states and the counties. I'm not complaining. Harford County, we got about $40 million in this last stimulus that we're going to put into broadband, roads, and infrastructure. And the next quarter, probably some additional business support. But I think that is going to come to as an expense of inflation, higher labor rates. I'm sure your folks have already seen the increase, not only in lumber, metal, construction supply, and shortages. And so, I worry about the possibility of increased inflation. I know for us right now, even we're building a small EMS station in the north part of the county, and some of our initial estimates and scoping have come in 20% higher. And I'm sure public school projects, projects that your members do are going to come in quite a bit higher and maybe be delayed because of labor shortages and so forth. So I think everyone's thinking about recovery. I'm worried about what some of the pieces of that recovery may look like and the long-term effect on that. So that, for some reason, budgets have always kept me up at night. I know the pandemic has for a while, but when you're running about $1 billion local government, you really, particularly, I like to keep the tax rate stable. We paid off more debt than we've taken on the last 5 years. So we've managed to keep ourselves in a good position. Not every local government or municipality is going to be in that position. In our own state, we can look at Baltimore City as an example that, thank goodness, some of the federal RAPA funds made its way to the city, because I think between some of their crime rate and folks not wanting to invest, that the city is really in some perilous times as well. And like it or not, the city is a linchpin, and I think very important to the overall health of the state, and that we've all got to kind of work together to make sure that doesn't happen.
Excellent point. Does anybody have a question for the county executive?
None of the members have questions, Chuck. I have one. First of all, you're right. Good morning, County Executive. You have been a fiscal, I'm not going to call you a hawk, because I don't think that's it. You have been diligent with respect to looking at policy and costs in the long term. The next governor is going to be faced with an unusual new time around budgeting. The state passed a constitutional amendment that gives a tremendous amount of budgeting power to the General Assembly, taken away from the governor. I don't know if you're familiar with that amendment or not that passed. Just want to get your insight on that, because I do think it's going to be a new day. I have my personal feelings. I think there's going to, if we have another Republican governor and a Democratic, it doesn't matter. The issue is the General Assembly now has a purse bag that's pretty significant. Your thoughts on that constitutional amendment and how the next governor will have to deal with that?
Yeah, I agree, Ellen. That was there for a reason. I think it had, even for Democratic governors, a moderating influence. I mean, when you're in that chair or as a county executive, you have to make some tough decisions. There's only so much money to go around. You have some fixed costs that you have to fund, whether it's healthcare, Medicaid, and a large portion of the state budget is fixed. Even in my own county budget, it is fixed. And I know none of my council members are on here. I would not want the county council to have that same authority to move around those type of funds, particularly when you have to balance and set priorities as an executive. And let's face it, the state constitution was crafted to have a strong executive model, and that's good and bad. But the governor takes the fall. When I roll out my budget, I take the hit for it too. You have to have really a fiduciary at the top that makes those decisions, like it or not. And it does, as you've seen with supplementals, and there are ways for the legislative leadership to work with the governor to work on priorities without throwing it into that whole General Assembly perspective. And it's scary when you look at policy, and I've been there. Even on the policy side, I get worried because some of the things that can get pushed through that really are bad policy and not good for the state or for local businesses. I worry about giving those budgetary strings to those legislators to do that. It is going to be completely really a game changer, and we're going to require both I've seen Democratic governors get chewed on too, because they didn't fund everything that a certain people want it funded. And it's one of the hardest things you have to do. And when I knew Ellen, I didn't have gray hair before I became county executive. So it is difficult. It's not easy to tell folks, no, we cannot afford that, or we cannot fund it. And so when you start moving around those type of priorities, it's just going to, I think, open a can of worms.
Yeah, I agree.
And when you spend, and as Ellen knows, when you spend money, it does have an upward pressure on having to raise money, find money, which means either tax increases or moving funds around, or really making the environment for the business community, investors, more difficult. So it's good to have an executive that has to be the final say to rein in spending to some degree.
I believe we have a question from one of our board members, Jeff Ash. Jeff, can you connect?
Yeah, sure. How you doing, Mr. Glassman? Good to see you.
Good to hear from you, Jeff.
I've got a question as it pertains to Congress, state and federal. Their approval ratings in the teens, right? But their reelection is in the high 80 some percent. What's your opinion on term limits, and how do we change this? Because I look at this as a small business owner, and we're in Anne Arundel County, that it seems like every time something happens that the middle class and we as business owners take it on the chin, and we keep reelecting the same, from my perspective, bad policymakers. What's your opinion?
Yeah. So I've always supported term limits. I've only, in each of my elected offices, I've only stayed 2 terms, even when I was in the House and in the Senate. I do like to tell folks I'm retired from BG&E, from their legal department. So most of my political jobs were part-time. I don't want folks to think I was a full-time politician either, but I do think that term limits needs to continue to be pushed. I know in some of our surveying, even in Republican and Democratic voters, that term limits is in the top 3 of the areas that we need to continue to push for. At the congressional level, I think at the state and local level also. It's funny to note that the governor, most county executives have a 2-term limit placed on them. And so I think on the legislative branch, a 2-term limit also would be appropriate. I think the governor, the other thing, Jeff, is that we've allowed both parties in some states to really gerrymander these legislative districts, both state and congressional, where they are cut usually by computer on their performance, whether as a Democratic district or a Republican district. They are cut to perform that way. So it makes it very difficult for a person of a different party to win in those districts. Most congressional districts on the congressional level are cut, and they perform to a T at the percentage that they're designed to perform at. When I say perform, if it's meant to be a 52 or 54% win for a Republican, that's how they perform. Or even for Democrats, as a Democrat, if they're cut to perform, that's the way they do. So I support Governor Hogan's efforts to have nonpartisan redistricting. I think in addition to term limits, we need to move with nonpartisan redistricting as soon as possible to make these districts the way they're supposed to be, more compact, based on the community that they come from. And I think that will help also where they're based on something other, whether they're Democrat or Republican. And once they're cut that way, what happens is that the folks on the far ends of each spectrum, whether it be a far right candidate or a far left candidate, they were able to win the primary and thus, win in the general election. And what has happened is that we have lost that balance in the middle of folks that kind of look at things on both perspectives. I think to some extent, common sense has went out the window, and we want advocates on the far right or far left, but no one really wants to govern and push for good government on what makes sense. And so those are two areas we've got to reform, where we're going to continue to see dysfunction at the federal level, which I think is off the chart. But we're also beginning to see it in state legislatures where there's a good bit of far left, far right, and not a whole lot of folks looking to make compromise or working out what's best for the economy, what's best for businesses and tax-paying families.
Yeah, my feeling is I'd like to see people legislate to do what's best for their constituents and not do what's best for their reelection. And I feel like it's at the state, the local, and the federal level for sure. And we as the little people just get pushed out. They just forget that it's we the people. And until we have this, or until we do it, they're never going to vote for it, right? Why would they vote to put themselves out of a job? So, I don't know how we get this done.
Fundamentally, it's just we got to push. There are bills out there. There's a regional bill. The governor, I think, did a good, made a very smart move by putting this year's redistricting out. Now we're going to have to see if the legislature will convene in the fall to do redistricting. I am curious to see how far, whether they will adopt a nonpartisan approach or will they begin to draw the maps themselves. And then we have to fall back on the court system. I think the last couple of times it's had a judicial review. I think this year the same thing will happen. And we've got to hope also that the judges begin to look at this as a last resort to kind of set some parameters on really nonpartisan redistricting and get these districts back to where, like you said, Jeff, families, the little people, regular people make up a majority of that district, that geography, not 30% on each side of the ends of the advocates running the show, because essentially that's what's really caused the dysfunction. If you're elected as a far right Republican, you can't come to the middle, or you're scared to come to the middle and actually work something out because you'll lose your primary. And there's not a lot of courage on either side to do that. And so I think the districts have to change to really make it a more possible. And that's what we've got to hope for. And that's the kind of areas I think we need to reform.
Great. I appreciate your answer, and I look forward to endorsing you in your next endeavor.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That's always good to hear. And listen, I'm hoping to go back. I've always announced at the local fire department. I learned, I kind of learned service in government where I grew up in Level. And man, it's a small farming village in Harford County. It's had a volunteer fire company, a general store, and a garage. And I used to tell people, they asked me where Level is, and I'd say the most notable thing about Level, it's spelled the same way forward as it is backwards. But there wasn't a whole lot there when you were growing up. I learned to be an EMT and a volunteer firefighter at 16. And I think that's where I kind of learned service, doing it for the right reasons to help people out. And government's pretty good, but I can tell you there's no better feeling that I used to get when, we were riding the ambulance and showing up at somebody's house or on an accident scene to help somebody in their darkest moment. And so I'm going to go back there on Thursday, actually, and we're hopefully going to make an announcement when I figure out what I want to do. And my wife keeps putting on the list that after 30 years, we're going to have a normal family life without me being gone half the time, but I'm still working on her. Things will work out, hopefully. She's put up with it for 33 years. Last week was her anniversary, and I did have enough sense not to make the announcement last week.
Do we have any other questions from the group? It looks maybe like we do not, and this has been a real honor, County Executive. It's been
Sure.
it's been an impressive presentation. It's obvious that you're passionate about being a steady hand, a great leader, and we're very fortunate to have you as an elected official in this market, which is so important to our members and our contractors. So kudos to everything you've done.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And listen, if you have, you've got my contact information. If there's an idea or something's come up that you want me to take a look at or promote that makes your members' jobs easier or creates a better marketplace, let me know, and I'd be glad to talk to you about it. All right.
That means a lot. Thank you so much.
All right. God bless everybody and be safe.
You too. Thank you. Have a great day.
Take care.